Holding it in 9 days, a few days before Tisha B'Av. And before we start speaking about Tisha B'Av, what has to be our focus and mindset, so I would just like to mention to our listeners, also to our viewers, that the title of the Shiur is Changing Priorities. The Jewish approach to fulfilling the Torah, the mitzvahs of the Torah, is basically a revolving around changing priorities. In other words, there are certain priorities which are non-negotiable, no question about that. However, due to the calendar year a Jew lives through, so basically his priorities do change. For example, if we have someone who is not well, so his main priority at this point is to pray, to daven, to do whatever he can to get well. No question about it. If the person is in poverty and he needs money to pay the bills, his priority at this point in his life is to try to achieve a certain livelihood in order to pay the bills. Somebody is physically weak, so he's going to daven presently. His main priority is to become strong. And during the holiday season, the priority is to be happy regardless of what a situation in life is. So this is a time that should arouse everybody to be happy. We don't want to elaborate too much on this. And this is basically the way a Jew lives. His entire life, he lives a life of basic priorities, mitzvahs, kiyum Torah, faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and there's also times where there is a type of revolving from one priority that at this point was perhaps taken for granted, therefore it's not a main priority, to having this as a main priority. This is to be understood no more than an introduction to Tisha B'Av with Hashem Yisbarach. We hope that it will soon be transformed to days of happiness and days of rejoicing. But just to have a small introduction, that we know the very purpose of Matan Torah, purpose of revelation, was to give the Jewish people what they call a modus vivendi, a living arrangement that ultimately required there should be a mutual agreement and a mutual understanding between Kudsha B'Richu, between God and the Jewish people. It was incumbent upon the Jewish people to commit themselves to this modus vivendi, to this arrangement which HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided to impose upon the Jewish people. Of course, kiyum Torah, kiyum mitzvahs, fulfilling this arrangement, which all of us, whether we're aware of it or we're not aware of it, we were all there, Matan Torah, and it was accepted. It was a perfect mutual consent and agreement. So we are challenged with the goal not so much to discover the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that was revealed to us at the Har Sinai, a set of moral standards, an ethical system. And of course, the reason, parenthetically, is because it's doubtful that a man could discover all the halachas by himself. And of course, we're not speaking about the ritual halachas, we're speaking about ethical and moral halachas as well. Perhaps we could come up with the concept, but all the ramifications, no question about it, had to be revealed to us. Right? And of course, when we speak about Torah morality, it should never, never be confused with the principle of morality that exists in temporary times, in contemporary times. Kadosh Baruch Hu communicated to us through an apocalyptic experience, all the morals and all the ethics of the Torah. This, of course, is opposed, without going into it too deeply, but this is opposed by the ethos of modern time. Kadosh Baruch Hu took us into his confidence, like a friend takes his fellow friend into confidence, by revealing to us the secret of a right and righteous path of life. As I say, this is to be understood no more than as an introduction. On Tisha B'Av, no question about it. We all mourn, we all grieve. It was the greatest of all tragedies, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. First Beis Hamikdash, second Beis Hamikdash, destruction of Yerushalayim. Speak about it a little later, and all the tragedies and catastrophes that took place in the course of Jewish history, including the Holocaust, and also in medieval times, what they call the Masei Slav in Lashon HaKodesh. Those are the Crusades, where hundreds of thousands of Jews submitted to martyrdom. Everything is recorded, everything is remembered, everything is mourned and grieved for on Tisha B'Av. We'll speak about that a little bit later. However, catastrophes by the Jewish people do not exist in a vacuum. There's a framework to these catastrophes, and usually the Jewish people are the ones that are responsible for bringing about these disasters. Chaim Volozhin, authoritative halachas, as well as Tikei Hashmu of the Vilna Gaon, already taught us that Nebuchadnezzar is not responsible for destroying the Beis Hamikdash. Of course, he is directly responsible for burning the Beis Hamikdash, destroying Yerushalayim. But insofar as the causal nexus of cause and result is concerned, it was the Jewish people, because the Beis Hamikdash simply could not exist anymore in an atmosphere where the Jewish people were not on the level where they would be worthy to have a Kadosh Baruch Hu's Shekhinah manifest in the Beis Hamikdash, and for the ultimate feeling of togetherness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which would, of course, bring about ultimate safety, shelter, and security in the existential life of every Jew. And as we review the Chazal insofar as what brought about these disasters, so we're very, very much interested in a Gemara in Daf Nun Ches in Gittin. Gemara tells us that Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, we're speaking about, of course, the second Beis Hamikdash during the Roman Empire, that the Roman Empire brought about the destruction. That's Golus Edom. So the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania was going to a metropolis near Rome, and he was told that there was a tinoik, a very young child there, who had a very good looking, also in a spiritual sense, with beautiful eyes, curly locks. And he went and he stood, Yeshua ben Hanania, he stood at the doorway of this prison, and he exclaimed the pasuk from Yeshayahu, Mi Nosan, who gave Yankiv to be crushed as a shalol, as a spoil? Who was the one that gave over the destruction of Yankiv? He was crushed as a spoil. For Yisrael, l'sheilu and v'gazlonim, and Yisrael to looters and robbers. That's the first part of the pasuk. So the child, upon hearing this question, Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya answered him with the end of the pasuk. Pseigli pasuk, tell me the end of the pasuk. That was the hope of Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya. So it says, Haloy Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about all of this. Why? Because Chatanu, we sinned. And we refused to go in his ways. And we did not hearken and listen to his Torah. And Yeshua was so impressed with the child's answer, so he said, Lo Yafuna, I'm sure, 100% sure, that this one will be authority of Jewish law in Am Yisrael. And therefore he took a shvuah, an oath, that he will not budge from there until he pays the ransom, whatever the price may be demanded. And he didn't leave that spot until he ransomed him for Domim Rerubim, for a very high figure. Layovru, Yomim, not too many days passed, and he became a great Torah authority. And who is that? Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, who also became a Kohen Gadol. So everyone tried to answer the question, what was the brilliance that so impressed Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya? Churban Beis Hamikdash was not a regular historical event, nor was the Great Holocaust, where almost half of the Jewish population in Europe was exterminated. 6 million to 8 million Jews were exterminated. So this is not something which even a man of great faith can simply accept, that this is part of the Jewish history. This is the normal events and episodes of Jewish history which will ultimately lead us to the end of days of Melech Mashiach. This was so extraordinary that questions had to be asked. Why did it take place? How are we responsible? The Jewish people will always be responsible. It was not worthy of having a Beis Hamikdash. So the Maharsha explains that the child mentioned 2 points, and one is a corollary to the other. What was the first point that he mentioned? Lo yovu lo leches b'drochov. They refused to go in the ways of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And what does that mean, says the Maharsha? The Maharsha means the Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. The care, concern, and compassion which a Kadosh Baruch Hu expresses vis-a-vis this world. Chesed Kel Kol Hayom. Every single second of the day is an expression and the manifestation of the kindness and sympathy of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And we are commanded to go in the ways of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Klal Yisrael lo yavu lo leches b'drachav. They refused to walk in his ways. It's a mitzvah. Olachta b'drachav. Ahu rachum. You're compassionate. Every Jew has to be compassionate too. So now we understand very good the Gemara. He fathomed what the Chazal, the greatest sages of all time, the Ruach Kodesh, what the Holy Spirit fathomed. What was responsible for Churban Bayesheni? We ask ourselves a question, so there's many answers. However, the salient answer and the mainstream answer is the Fishe Midu Divreim al Divrei Torah. Klal Yisrael were Mekayim the Torah. However, there was no Lifnim Mishuras Adin, says Rashi. And at this point, it's very important to explain what Lifnim Mishuras Adin means. And we should like to bring a few examples. So, We have a shura sadin. Man insists upon following, correct, the line of the law. He cannot be punished. He cannot be condemned b'dinei odom. So the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, according to the Chazal and the way the Mashal explains the answer of that child prodigy, does not revolve around fulfilling the basic line of the law. So why was Yerushalayim destroyed? Because the entire state of affairs, say the Chazal, and Rashi explains it beautifully, the entire state of affairs, they kept the rules of the Torah, no question about it. Correct? But they were not Mekayim Lifnim Mishuras Adin, and therefore the entire state of affairs, says Rashi, was related to the rule of Din Torah, but not of Lifnim Mishuras Adin. And therefore, they were not Mekayim, they did not fulfill that mitzvah, that important mitzvah of Halachto B'Drochov. The Gemara tells us in Bava Mitzvah, which this is a very, very definitive Gemara. It's a far explaining what it means, Lifnim Mishuras Adin. Rabbi Bar Chana had some carriers who had to deliver for him some barrels of wine. And during the delivery, they broke them. Rashi points out that we're dealing with a case where they were negligent. Why? Because it was not an incline that they had to maneuver, but it was a straight path. So if you hire workers to deliver barrels of wine, and as they're delivering them, it's on a straight path, so therefore, if the barrels break, then they're called Poishim, it's a Pshia, and they're chayiv to pay. That's exactly what happened. So what did he do? He grabbed their clothes to keep an escrow until they would pay him the money, right? Due to the damage that they caused them in breaking the barrels by sheer negligence. No, the workers came to Rav, who was the outstanding Talmud Chacham of his generation, and they complained. So Rav told, Rabbi Bar Chana, who was one of the great Amoraim of that time as well, to return the clothes. So he asked them in a wondrous form, Dina Hochi? Is this the law? They owe me money for damages caused. So Rav answered him, yes, this is the law. This is the law? Yeah. Why? Pasuk in Mishlei says a person should go the derech tzadikim. You go in the way of good people. So that's the law. Not be strict with the law, but he should do chesed, and he should be flexible and bend himself beyond the written letter of the law. This is called Lifnim Mishuras Adin. This is exactly what the Gemara says. And a Torah person has to forgive, he has to overlook, and he has to do kindness beyond the demarcation line of the law. Of course, there's no question about it. Like the Rishonim pointed out, this depends on the person, the situation, the circumstances. But we're talking about a Torah person. So is this the law or is it not the law? This is also the law. Because this, strictly speaking, is halach and choshen mishpat. And this is a kiyum mitzvah within the aspect of the chiyuv mitzvah, the obligation. There's a minimum and a maximum. The minimum is the fin Mishuras Adin. And the halachic ramification is somebody goes according to the strict din, that's the minimum kiyum mitzvah. In these situations, he cannot be punished by bezdin shel mata, doing nothing wrong. However, for certain individuals in certain conditions, The Bezdin Shel Malo, this we consider the sin because he didn't do the maximum that the Shiur mitzvah, that his obligation, requires of him. The Gemara continues, these carriers continued asking Rav, what about our wages? We are aniyim, we are poor people, we worked hard a whole day, and we have nothing to show for it, and we have no food to buy to eat. So Rav told the Rabbi Barachana, pay them for their day's work. So Rabbi Barachana explained to Rav, Dina Hochi, this is the din? This is the law? Why should I have to pay them? Well, not only did they have to deliver the wine for me, but they even broke the barrels. I have to pay them their wages? Answered Rav, yes, this is the din. Because it's written, the Darkei Tzadikim Tishmar, you should keep the ways of Tzadikim. A Tzadik is one who would pay these poor people. They're unfortunate people, pay their wages. And with your action, explains Rashi, you are emulating HaKadosh Baruch Hu's way. Rabbi Bachana, who's a great Torah man, has to go lift the Mishura Sadin, he has to do the maximum. There's a demarcation line and there's above and beyond. But that above and beyond is Torah morality. It's Torah ethicism. There's no morality, there's no ethicism that exists fruits from the Torah. There's no such idea as modern people would have it. So now we understand the brilliance of this child because he understood that this was the beginning of the end. Once the Jewish people lost that sensitivity, that soft reasonings of the heart, insofar as their conduct, Ben Adam, the Chavera is concerned, so ipso facto it deteriorated, it declined, and unfortunately, very unfortunately, it led also to Averis Ben Adam, but that was not the cause. That was not the cause. The degeneration of not having the sympathy, the kind-heartedness when it was required to do the maximum, that brought about the destruction. And it's very fascinating that the Riyah Kodesh told us, Eicha Yoshva Vododo Yil, Rabossi Hoisa. So the Zohar says, Eicha Yoshva Vododo Yil. How did the city of Jerusalem, all of a sudden that was so populated, is now in isolation? Rabossi Hoisa was a great metropolitan. So the Zohar says, Eicha Yoshua Vadodo Yir is Rashi Tevis Evo. Aleph Yud, Beis Hey, hatred. Rabossi Am Hoisa Evo. And this is a remez to Bayesheni that was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam. Mishnah Berurah brings down to Yerushalmi that Sinas Chinam Adayim Reketes Beinenu, in our interpersonal relationships, there's also an aspect of resentment and downright hatred. Jewish people, despite all the tzaras that we have not come together. The first one that said Eicha was Moshe Rabbeinu. This week's parasha, Eicha Esa Levadi Torchachem Umasachem V'Chivchem. How can I bear your trouble, your burden, and your strife all by myself? So this is Moshe Rabbeinu's lament. And as we know, we read that pasuk with the tune of Eicha. Eicha Esa Levadi Moshe cannot tolerate it. So Rashi says, what's Torchachem? Melamed Shoy Yisrael Torchanim. Echad Meyam Roya es Bal Dino Noitzeach Bedin. Yesh Li Edim Lovi, Yesh Li Rayas Lovi. So Rashi tells us there were three complaints that Moshe Rabbeinu had. Very interesting. What was the first one? So Rashi tells us it was simply a mocking of the law. We'll just go back now to what Rashi says. First, your troubles. Right? I can't bear your encumbrance, your burden and strife. So Rashi says, what was Moshe complaining about? Torchachem. There was a habit that had developed where one litigant saw the other was winning the case. The loser would say, I have more witnesses, I have more proof, thus bottling up the legal system. What does burden refer to? Derisively mocking any action Moshe would take. Not only did they ridicule, scorn the legal system, but they also ridiculed the leaders. Difficult to say, but this is what Rashi explains the words. Torchachem u'masachem. What were the burdens? If Moshe left his house early, they would say that something was wrong in his house. If he left late, they would speculate he was sitting and contemplating some evil plot against the people. Unbelievable. And then Rashi says, what is Rivchem? Rivchem is difficult to understand, but Rashi says Rivchem is rig, complainers, malcontents. Like it says in the pasuk afterwards, "V'teirognu b'yolechem, atonu b'sinas Hashem ha'isonu etzionu mitzrayim, hashmidi b'yad emoiri." Kadosh Baruch Hu loves you. You hate a Kadosh Baruch Hu. V'teirognu b'yolechem. They were malcontents. They were contentious, always complaining. They didn't see all the good HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them, and everything they had was from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And through the Raya of Mehemno, Moshe Rabbeinu. So this was the first Eichel. What was the second Eichel? Right? So we have it over here. It's all one idea. Had they rectified the first Eichel, Moshe Rabbeinu, there wouldn't be a second Eichel. What was the second Eichel? Eichel Yoshev V'Dodoil. What's the shirish? What was the root? Hatred, evil hatred. And the third one, of course, is in the Haftarah that we will read in Shabbos. A total disregard for loyalty. Milesi mishpat, tzedek yolin bo, va'ata beratzchim. How has Jerusalem become like a harlot? It was once a faithful city, full of true justice, in which righteousness and chesed would lodge. But now they came to be murderers. So there's only one possible rectification. That's the end of the Haftarah. Tziyim will be redeemed through justice and tzedakah, a tzedakah justice. It has to be tempered by softness, by kindness, by compassion. And this is not only It's not enough to remove the rule of wickedness. You don't have to be wicked, cruel, and violent, like of generations of the Stein V'Amoira, where the poor were oppressed, robbery prevailed. But there has to be a bein Adam lechavera of sympathy and kindness. There has to be a respect for the legal system that HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged for us to follow, and that legal system is minimum and maximum, and Torah people are required to do the maximum. So the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, basically speaking, not because there was no justice. Strict justice prevailed, no question about it. But there was a hardening of the heart. And once a Jew has a hardened heart, so then there's a total degeneration. There was no lifting Mishuras Hadin, and that will ultimately be the redemption of the Jewish people, and that will also liberate justice, because there will also be concomitant with justice the warmth and sympathy of lifnim Mishuras Hadin, and this is the destruction of Jerusalem. And when we sit on the ground and we properly mourn Yerushalayim, so we should realize what we're mourning for. We do not have too much time, but I believe it's important for us to mention briefly the halachic discussion that took place the last 60 years. Most, I should say, 99% of all the Jewish poskim said we have no right to change any part of the tefillas. So we'll just mention one point here. Mincha B'nai Yerushalayim Minhag Ashkenaz is to add the tefillah of Nachem. Minhag of the Sfardim is the same in all the tefillahs. We say it dafka by Mincha, because Mincha was the time of the main destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and that's the time we need the greatest consolation. So therefore, we beg HaKadosh Baruch Hu to offer us that consolation. So the words of Nachem, we'll just read one or two of the verses. So we say in English, "Oh Hashem, our God, console the mourners of Tziyon, the mourners of Yerushalayim. Nachem Hashem Elokeinu es avela Tziyon es avela Yerushalayim. Vesoir ha'avela, console Jerusalem. Who's avela? Who is grieving? V'achareva. The word chareva means just desolate. U'bizuya v'ashemema. She's ruined in her abode, scorned without her glory. B'bli bonel. It's not inhabited. It's totally destroyed. And it is absolutely barren, as a barren woman who never gave birth. There are no inhabitants sitting there. So this, after the 6-day war, according to one or two authorities, was deleted. And the reason is because this does not in any way have relevance to the times that we're living in. Because we see Jerusalem, this was the question that was addressed to the Poskim, we see Jerusalem is being built up. Jewish people are living here. the tens of thousands, and we also have the Kaisel Maravi, where millions, the course of the year, go, and therefore, on the contrary, today Jerusalem is full of cheerfulness, the Kolrina Vitaida, time to be happy, we have the Kaisel, right, we're building Jerusalem, rebuilding it, everywhere you go, Jerusalem is being built. So, the most authoritative and the most elaborate answer was given by Yechavet Doas, Vadi Yosef, Chelek Rishon Siman Ben Gimel. And of course, he brings down that it's forbidden for us in any way to change a nusach of tefillah that the Anshe Knesset Gedolah formulated, because we don't understand too much. The Chidah, for example, that it brings down, explains to us that every single word of the tefillahs that we have today, Anshe Knesset Gedolah, have a foundation of Adnei Rozei Yolim, of deep secrets, like the Zohar says, and Rabbeinu Hari HaKodesh explains, everything has deep intentions, and like the Gemara says, anybody who knows how to misaken, how to formulate the bracha against informers, Rambam Gamliel, Nasi be Israel, he couldn't formulate it. Answer is, says the Chidah and the Pnei Yoshua, because every ois voice, every single letter from the Nusach HaBrachas has a deep, deep mystical understanding, and it's only a great Chochem, the Ruach HaKodesh Shari Olav, only he's able to be mechaveh properly to the depth and the mysteries of all the words, and only that will be able to, as it were, achieve the goal when we pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nefesh HaChaim said it, Aser l'shanos hanusach hatfilah. So that's a halachic response. However, it's much more than that. When we speak of Yerushalayim, we speak of Yerushalayim basically the Ir Atika, the area by the Kaisel and the Ir Atika. The Ir Atika to this day is uninhabited by the Jewish people. 10% at the most. 90% is inhabited by enemies of the Jewish people. Most of the great synagogues are still destroyed. And the manhigim that reside there are Shofech Dam Yisrael Kamayim, as in the olden times. Ubesvivos Hamikdash, Kvurim Yishmelim, Rishoyim Yishalchu Bom, and the Pigrei Meiseyem, the bodies of the dead, they bring to the Mokoim HaMikdash, Beis Kodesh HaKadoshim, and the Gemara tells us how beautifully the Rebbe Loza ben Aroich, he was crying, why? That's the Beis Kodesh HaKadoshim, as Evan HaShesiyah Shebeter Beis HaMikdash. And that Evan is the holiest Evan. And to bring Meiseyem Atmeyim Olecho L'tamois Amokoim Amikudish Ki Anochi Roye, he sees Baruch HaKodesh Aleven Ashtiyo Asidin Losei Sumois as Pigre Meiseyem, the dead corpses L'tamois Milo Yifkel Kach In our generations, this took place. No great simcha when we see the Kaisel Maravi. It's a Zeicher Lemigdosh, said the Bavadia, because according to Pesach Acharon, Avram Danzig, the Chai Odom, says that this is the wall of the Beis Hamikdash, not of Harabayis. And inside is the Beis Kodesh HaKadoshim. So this is to be Ma'ira B'chiyah, when we see that basically the whole Beis Hamikdash is in destruction. So therefore, it's Chareva, Yerushalayim is Avela, Iker of Yerushalayim is Beis Hamikdash. We can't go there because we're Tmei Mesim. You go to the Kaisel, that should be Ma'ira, weeping and mourning. There's a lot to elaborate, but better not to do it. I believe that the point is made very clear. This was accepted by everyone. However, what's Negea us, it's very important to mention the last part. What about Western Yerushalayim? 1 million people, built up, populated by Jewish people, yeshivas. However, when we take a good look, so we see the ruchnius of Yerushalayim, the spirituality of Yerushalayim. Seinu harabim is the shofel madrega, the lowest madrega possible. Eskera lekim ve'amiyah. Yerushalayim kol ir al tila benuya. Yerushalayim mushbelas achol tachtiyo. The Shar Yisachar explains the pasuk Eskera Elikim ve'amiyah. I remind myself of my Nishalaylam, and I break down and cry. Yerushalayim kol ir al tila benuya. Where I see every city is perfectly built, including Yerushalayim. And afterwards we say Yerushalayim mushpelas achol tachtiya, and Yerushalayim has been demeaned and condemned to be on the lowest moral and ethical level. How's that possible? Because if we take a deeper look, what do we see? Everybody walks the street should be heartbroken. The hisparkus of the door, B'chai Tairu mitzvahs. We walk the streets, we see a door that is pyrek oil. They know nothing. What's Tairu mitzvahs? Chinuch halofim revavos miyadei Yisrael Tairu mitzvahs, and the whole chinuch of the secular schools is anti-Torah, anti-Judaism. Jews become anti-Semites. Tznius doesn't exist. Older women today don't know what it is to have tznius. Talking about the secular olam. And even by us, the musar, the ethicism, the morality, the kindness, courtesy, loving kindness, one person for another, does not exist either. To a degree it exists, but not the way it should be. The Fnimi Shiur Sadin is not even mentioned even in our circles. And what about the Chilul Shabbos and the Sidrei HaKashrus? You can get a Dover Acher anywhere you want today in Yerushalayim. So therefore, it's broken. Our moinos of Yerushalayim ad shel tachtiyo until the bottom. So there's no great celebration when we see what's going on, if we open our eyes. So therefore we grieve for Yerushalayim, we grieve for ourselves, and if we're not going to misake, what we have to improve and ameliorate to the best of our ability, the moral code, the ethical code, the kindness one to another. So even if we would have a Beis Hamikdash tomorrow, it'll be destroyed again, because it's not a gratuitous gift. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will not be our neighbor unless we are neighbors one to another the way it should be, with loving kindness. So therefore we hope that it will be Mekuyim Banu, Simchas Yerushalayim V'gilu Bo, Kol Aveo. Simchas Yerushalayim, we want to make Yerushalayim happy, and we want to be lovers of Yerushalayim. Sisu Ita Masa is Kol HaMisablim Bo, and those that are Misabel Yerushalayim, they mourn the grief for Yerushalayim. But more than that, they accept upon themselves to go change priorities, not just in grieving and mourning, but to change the priorities of Lifnim Mishuras Adin should be our goal orientation. And then we'll all be happy with Yerushalayim when it's restored to its glory. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will console us like a mother consoles a child, and we hope that in our day we will see Anochi Anachemchem. God, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu will console you in Yerushalayim Tenuchamu, and we'll all be consoled when the glory of Yerushalayim is restored to the highest level of spirituality possible, and we would have been the catalyst to have that highest level of spirituality restored in Yerushalayim.